So we're here with Tim Cook. He's a professor at Carleton University and award-winning author. He just gave a talk entitled The Borders Between Life and Death, Stories of the Uncanny and Paranormal Among Canadian Soldiers in the First World War. So why do you think that, the Great War is still relevant to, students today and young Canadians?
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up to an interesting time, right? The 100th anniversary of the First World War, 2014 to 2018. It's going to be a very heady period of commemoration, and some said even celebration. If you look around the world, France, Australia, Britain, everyone is marking this war. Some people have used that term celebration. It's the wrong one. Of course, this is the war that killed 9 million people. It destroyed Europe. It remade the Middle East. Countless things come out of the war. The rise of communism, fascism. So it's one of those things that we need to understand the 20th century. It affected Canada, brought in income tax, brought in women and the right to vote, massive government intervention in the lives of Canadians. So this is really one of those events that changes Canada. And I think 100 years later, we have a chance to reflect upon that. And so my talk today was one aspect of that, something that historians have not paid a lot of attention to, but this idea of the supernatural, the uncanny, and how soldiers were trying to make sense of this terrible war in the trenches.
And I think your talk really highlighted well is that, history isn't just about, boring old men and treaties. That, especially for young Canadians, this war was about, the 18-year-old guy in the trenches,
Sure.
and like at that level, right? And I
Yeah.
think that, your talk really highlighted how that is, why this war
Sure.
and these events actually are very relevant and
Yeah.
significant to young Canadians today.
That's right. 600,000 Canadians enlisted, thousands of them underage, 20,000 soldiers under the age of 18. Many of them, 2,000 who were killed. And I talked to high school students about that. I mean, this is a war that you would have been fighting in. And so there's a relevance there. There's a connection to this day, and I think that's worth reminding people of.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important. I mean, you've written a number of books on the Great War. You've, including your latest book, Warlords,
Right.
which was a finalist for the Charles Taylor Prize.
Right.
And you also wrote a two-volume series on Canada's involvement in the First World
Right.
War. So what is it that keeps you coming back to this topic, and what was it,
Yeah.
say, as a young student that got you first interested
Sure.
in the Great War?
That's a good question. I did my undergrad at Trent University. It's a small liberal arts university like Brock. Great place, it's a great community. And I knew my professors, they knew me by name. And this was in the early 90s, and I was, the country was falling apart through Meech Lake, and I thought I was going to be a constitutional historian. And then I took this class on the World Wars in third year, and it really turned me on to it. And it was the soldiers' writing, their poetry, the prose, that got me interested. And so it's always been that soldier's experience, these young men. How did they cope? How did they endure? How did they make sense of war? How do they deal with death? How do they kill? And that has been the driving presence in my books At the Sharp End and Shock Troops, which you mentioned, and to this day, carrying forward.
So you mentioned also in the Q&A about your upcoming book. So you've written very extensively on these kind of topics. So
Yeah.
what's next for you? What's your upcoming book going to be about?
Well, my new one is a 2-volume history on the Second World War. So I did 2 volumes on the first. I said I would never do that again. Back to back, it was punishing. But I've been thinking about the Second World War, a grandfather who flew in Bomber Command in the Second World War, and I thought, I need to explore this. And so I'm doing that, and the first volume comes out in September.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I'm looking forward to it,
Great.
definitely as a student of history. So this is Bryan Levesque, and here with Tim Cook, professor of history at Carleton University. Great talk, and thanks for coming to Brock.
Thank you very much.